Well, there was a photo that made it onto social media of what was called CNN's War Room. And it looked like of the many people gathered in the War Room, which was, I guess, designed to address some of the issues that involved engineers and digital developers. There appeared to be no Black people in the room. Later on, it turned out that there was apparently one Black man in the room who was not at a glance easily discernible to be Black. But here we are where, Catrice, I will admit to you that I spent many days and nights running around the Dallas Morning News newsroom because I worked on what I call the other side of the plantation. I worked at WFAA TV. Kevin Merida, who is now the editor of the LA Times executive, he was there too, working at the time. And John Yearwood, who I see has joined us, was also hanging out there. Krissah, I would say that years and years ago, Milton Coleman contacted me about applying for a job at the Washington Post. I interviewed with 3 different people, and no one was willing to tell me that it wasn't me. It just kind of petered out. And then I eventually, I think at that point, went over to be the news director at KHOU TV in Houston, where Anzio joined that company. I'm kind of doing all things circulate through me, but not really. But what I'm getting at here is, and in John's case, and you've been with the Baltimore Sun for years and have seen a lot of changes there, but what I'm getting at here is even with the appointment of some pretty high-ranking journalism leaders who are Black, we're still fighting over numbers and representation. Let's talk about, from your perspective, here is a question that I'm going to ask point blank. If you found that at your particular news operation that there was a paltry representation of Black folks in a particular area, and in order to get some degree of parity, you'd need to add 4 or 5 Black folks, could you add them without having to justify adding 4 or 5 Black people in a row? Would you have to sprinkle in some others in there so that it didn't look like, oh, you're Black and you're hiring Black people, which seems to be a concern that certainly back in my day I heard. Concern that what will it look like? Or, you know, we didn't bring you in here just so you'd hire other Black people. Although I often wondered, why not? But could you, so my first question to you is, could you, without remorse or fear, hire consecutive Black people in order to achieve the kinds of representation that you believe needs to happen at your particular outlet? I'll start with you, Catrice.
Sure. Put me in the hot seat first. I like it. So to answer your question, you know, I was thinking about recent hires. And so I just brought on John X. Miller to be in a senior leader position that was newly created. I just hired a producer and a breaking news reporter, Ariana, who is from this area, but happens to be African-American. I look at this in a number of ways. So I'm in Texas, right? So it's really important for me to not bring on Black, but brown, because so many of the folks in Texas, I mean, so many of our residents and our readers are Latino, and we want to have more of those readers. So I look at it as I've got to bring on top talent, and we are top talent, right? So I've instituted that. And I want to make sure that we're reaching across different, you know, unique, I would say, taking unique approaches of who we're hiring. I'm looking for people who actually, in some cases, are great at digital minds, but don't actually work in media and haven't. And so I would say the answer to that is, I don't have a problem with that as long as they're the people for the job and they want to be here. My biggest struggle, frankly, is not proving right now that I need that, because I have a lot of autonomy to hire who I need for the positions. My issue mostly is people who want to live in this area because we're a local newsroom. So that's what I face. But I would answer your question, no. We've hired a number of African Americans since I've joined, as well as Latinos.
Great. John?
I wouldn't say that I would have, because I'm not the final say so as far as hiring in our newsroom. I am probably the only reporter on this panel, but I am here to say that even though I am a reporter, I have instituted a lot of change at our paper. We, under my leadership for our diversity committee, we just had our first a major apology from the paper. It was 4,500 words apologizing for 185 years of unfair, unethical, and quite frankly, racist behavior and coverage. So I'm a firm believer in lead, follow, or get out of the way. And I'm a firm believer in making sure that you use your voice once you are there. So I don't think that it is necessary to have 5 Black people just for the sake of being Black. I think it's necessary to have them be culturally competent and to have a voice once they get to the table. And what we do at the paper, we have an approach where no matter who you are going to be culturally competent to cover a community like Baltimore, which is 70% Black. I think that's more important than having just a voiceless African-American at the table who is not going to bring anything to the people in which we cover. So no matter who comes through the door, we want to make sure that they are all on the same page, that they are covering our communities in a fair and equitable way, and then they are bringing sensitivity and the nuances that are necessary and that we have always applied to our white populations.
Okay, Krissah? Am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yes, that's right, Krissah. And nice to meet you, Paula. You are a legend in the field, and good to be with you all. I would say, in my experience, the job that I am in at the Post, the senior leadership role that was created in 2020 after the death of George Floyd, it really felt like, for our newsroom in particular, I mean, we'd had lots of conversations about diversity and representation through the years, a myriad of diversity committees. There was a demand from the staff for action in that moment. And so the creation of this position, a director of diversity and inclusion in HR for the entire company, and then about a dozen reporting and editing roles, covering everything from environmental justice to health disparities to criminal justice and just race and identity broadly. Really with the intention that in filling those roles, we would fill them in a way that would improve representation in our newsroom. But I was also very cognizant of the fact that we were in a moment where there were no Black reporters or editors on the investigative unit, one of our premier units. And I could have that conversation with other senior leaders and hiring managers, but the staff itself was demanding to see change and to, have a situation where, you're producing stories about law enforcement in America, and you can go all the way up through the editing chain and not have an African-American read that story. That was problematic, and very clearly problematic. And so, being able to have those conversations very forthrightly and think about how we solve for those things has been a conversation that we're engaged in. And it feels much more productive than a kind of static place where I think we can get about, Obviously, we're in a position where we have been blessed to grow and add those positions. But now it really is about both driving representation, but then creating a culture that of the kind that John was just talking about, right? Where people actually feel like they belong and have a stake in the place and can shape it for the future.
Thanks, Krissah. Okay, Anzio, how about in your case?
In my case, I am fortunate to be in a position to have to be at the table and have a voice, and I would like to think it's an elevated voice in the decision-making process about who gets hired. To answer your question, I've hired 4 or 5 people that look like me in a row several times. But I would say that the main thing that I work on and try to strive is to make sure that the process is fair. I am a big believer that when you look at the hiring process, from the time you create the job description and where you post the jobs and track it all the way through the pipeline, that hiring process, that if you give us a fair opportunity, if you give us an even playing field, and that means educating those who would be the direct supervisors of the person you're hiring, all the way through. You give us an even playing field, and we do more than okay. But I am also, very cautious about making sure that I do not set us up for failure. And I can say that honestly because I've done it. I've hired someone who looked like me, who reminded me of me, and I kind of looked the other way on some things that that quite didn't add up about the person, and ultimately it didn't work out. It didn't work out, and that's those the ones I feel the worst about. So I am very cautious now to make sure that I don't set us up for failure and put us in a position that we can't, maybe do or not ready to do. And so to answer your question, yes, I've done it.
I should have started out by saying that I wanted the 5 of us to have a conversation with each other, so that it's not that I'm just the one asking questions and you all are answering. So the 4 panelists, you should, feel free to unmute yourselves, because now I'm going to try to follow up on some of the statements that you made. So, John, years ago, I remember going into newsrooms where I was maybe one of 1 or one of 3 Black folks. And what I was always struck by, as I experienced when I went to the Fort Worth Star-Telegram years ago, it was before my first day. I walked in and I was looking at the bulletin board. And as I was reading the notices on the bulletin board, this white male reporter came up next to me and asked who I was. And I said, "Oh, I'm starting here as a reporter." "Oh," he said, "another one?" And I didn't know what he meant. Like, I didn't know what you mean. He said, "Well, oh, there's another reporter who's starting this week." And I said, "Oh, okay." He said, "Yeah, she went to Vassar, but we haven't seen her yet." And I looked at him and said, "So I suspect that I'm the only reporter starting this week, and I went to Vassar." And he just was almost apoplectic. He was staring at me like I'd just grown another head. And importantly, the point he wanted to make was, "Oh, well, almost all the other Black reporters who were here came through this special program. Did you come through this special program?" And I said, "I wish I had. But no, I just came here from another newspaper." Now I'm bringing this up because in my experience as a working journalist, as a working reporter, as an editor, and ultimately as news director, et cetera, I've encountered a whole lot of mediocrity in various newsrooms all over the country where I've worked. There are a whole lot of people hanging on and who seem to do okay. And not often are they Black. Frequently, the heights of mediocrity are reached by the white folks. So I stood up once in a meeting and asked, does anybody agree with me that I think that we will get parity and equity when Black folks have the right to be mediocre too?
Mm.
And it was like, oh, maybe, you know, like, how can you say that? How can I say that? We certainly can't believe that everybody here, based on working with them, is exceptional. And yet, we're all supposed to be magical and exceptional. So how about, you know, give me some thoughts on if the goal of the people who are in charge of your organization is to have excellence across the board, is that what they're striving for these days? Or do you note that at times there are people who might be getting, on a scale of 1 to 5 ratings wise, maybe they're getting a 2.5, enough to get by and hang on. But how many of the 2.5s are necessarily people who look like us?
I believe that we are looking for excellence all the time. I don't think that we are looking for people who are going to do the bare minimum. Quite frankly, the newsroom isn't big enough to allow people to skate through. That might have worked in the 90s and maybe even 2000s when we were bloated. Newsrooms were bloated with employees where you could go about a month without having to turn in a story. That just doesn't happen nowadays. It can't happen. When you have a smaller staff, you need to have people who can produce clean copy, a variety of stories, and in an efficient manner. So that's the first thing off the bat from the start. I believe that our editors, our management at the paper, they want the best, and they want not only the best, but people who are going to be culturally competent. I swear I'm going to sound like a broken record saying that word today, but I think it's of the utmost importance. We want to, that's why our management has entrusted our committee to come up with ideas that I think push us and propel us forward. We have a diverse expert database so that all employees in our newsroom can consult this database for sources so that there are no excuses for them saying, I couldn't find a person of color. I couldn't find an LGBTQ expert. I couldn't find an older person. I couldn't find a younger person. This database is broken down by these subjects and factors. We were the first paper to do a content audit with the Maynard Institute in 5 to 10 years. I know this because I pursued them and they told me this, that no newsroom in the country was working on or had requested a content audit. You don't do that. You don't spend that type of money unless you are interested and serious about making sure that your content reflects the values that you have at your paper. We also have our cultural competency style guide, which is the law of the land at our paper. Our executive editor and managing editor have told, we've taught it to the staff, we've taught it to our editors, and this is the expectation that our reporters follow this, the most up-to-date language, the most up-to-date practices, best practices in the industry in dealing with the community. So I don't think that they would make these pushes, these efforts, investing this money and time and making sure that these are the rules for our paper if they weren't serious about it.
So your paper didn't necessarily have what the Washington Post experienced, as Krissah described, which is that following.
I have to go and get online with my
Enid,
thing.
could you mute yourself, please? After George Floyd, the murder of George Floyd, that the staff demanded changes, that there could be an investigative unit team where a story could get handed from editor to editor and no African American would have looked at it. So that doesn't exist at the Baltimore Sun. And then Krissah, could you please address a part of what John is referring to, which is that, you know, the Post is certainly noted for its exceptional journalism, and the Baltimore Sun is noted for exceptional journalism. Now, how do you have within, I don't know, 50, 60 miles of each other, a circumstance where John is explaining quite, to me, in glowing terms, superlative working conditions as it relates to diversity and inclusion. And then, Krissah, you had the Washington Post where staff, I won't just limit it to reporters, but staff was demanding changes that would be more equitable and fair insofar as Black people are concerned. How does that comport?
Yeah, I also want to say, Paula, to your kind of opening there, I wish someone like you had that conversation to me about the right to be mediocre 5 years or so into my career. I think that's important to say. One of my biggest learnings in moving from reporting to editing was just like, wow, this is what Pulitzer Prize winning copy looks like when it comes over. I shouldn't have spent all those years feeling like, well, anyway, I would have wanted excellence for myself anyway, but you get the gist. I would say, we're a newsroom that has been able to grow. And, when I joined the Post some 20 years ago, you mentioned Milton Coleman, very strong community of Black journalists at our newspaper, and a very strong history there. I mean, I read Volunteer Slavery before I joined, the newsroom. I mean, there's just a lot of terrain, and I found a lot of support. And I think as the industry has changed and as our newsroom has grown, one of the things that we definitely needed to grapple with was as we have added journalists, and excuse me for the noise in the background, my daughter's in the room with me. As we added journalists, particularly audience focused operations, projects editors, thinking about career pathing for some of those often younger, often diverse journalists who, unlike, I feel like I had 5 different careers at the Post. You move from, reporting in financial to reporting in style to covering a campaign and all of these different things. And we hadn't really structurally created the kind of bridges that would really allow people to navigate their careers and have long careers and, and really kind of build what I think of as our assignment editors of the future. So some of our issue was structural. Some of it, was retention, right? Like we did have, very strong reporters of color on the investigative team who, for one reason or another, departed. And so, that means going back to the culture, that conversation about building a culture of belonging and being able to shape the paper for the future and really having the kind of robust conversations that John is talking about was something that we needed to do and that I think we're engaged in now. I mean, you can be so focused on the journalism that you're not thinking about what it really means to have an inclusive environment when you're running meetings and shaping ideas and who gets, what assignments and how that all comes together. And that was part of the work that we needed to do and that I think we're doing now.
Paula, I think when we look at that diversity and you asked about the hiring and how many do you hire, how can you catch up? I think it's important for people to remember that the diversity part is it's not an overnight thing. You have to look at the long-term play of diversity, and the diversity, comes in a lot of different, ways. But certainly you got, if you're going to be in a DEI, role or position, you're responsible for, making sure you have, all types of people of color, women, I will put at the, highest priority, for me is making sure that we have, that we have ladies at the top in the boardroom and in decision-making roles. So that diversity is a long-term play. And then the inclusion part of our titles is the one that I really strive to make sure that we're getting at every single day. I think where diversity is the longer play, the inclusion has to happen in the moment. In the moment, you have to be able to identify, you have to be able to feel it. When you look around the table, you look at even if you're standing up and you're having a conversation about something, and everybody is not, the right people that need to be represented at that conversation is not. And then how do you get that in the moment, especially in newsrooms? How many times do we sit around editorial tables and we're having conversations about, ladies or some members of the LGBT community, and then they're not at the table? That's where I think you go wrong. And so, this is where I would say you got to have a guy. Everybody's got a guy. Somebody needs someone. I got a guy. I got somebody. You got to be able to pick up the phone and call somebody and get them, or yell at somebody in the newsroom, hey, come over and join us in this conversation. Because when you lack the inclusion, no doubt your whatever it is you're working on is not going to be vetted. It's not going to be as creative. It's not going to be as innovative, and your chances of making some type of mistake in editorially goes up.
Patrice, I was assistant night city editor at the Dallas Times Herald, which was once the competition to the Dallas Morning News. And there was the executive editor of the newspaper came out into the newsroom one day and said, hey, Paula, come here. I walked over, he's the boss. He said, I want you to join the page one budget meeting today. And for the folks who don't have a newspaper background, the editors of each section, page one of, features, and page one of sports, and page one of news, etc. So he wanted me to join this meeting, and I asked him why. And he said, well, because I need your voice in the meeting. I need a Black voice in the meeting. And I said, but everybody in there is a page one editor, and I'm assistant night city editor. He said, yeah, I know, but come into the meeting, because otherwise we won't have that perspective. And I said, I'm not coming into the meeting. And he just stared at me and asked why. I said, those people in that meeting will resent me for being in that meeting, because the only reason why you have me in that meeting is because I'm going to add the perspective of millions of Black people. And I said, why don't I do this? Give me a week and I will give you at least 5 resumes of Black reporters who absolutely belong in that meeting. He said, you won't come into this meeting. What if I were going to make you a page one editor? And I said, are you? He said, well, in time. I said, then no, I'm not coming in. So I did get him resumes, and he did hire somebody.
Would you do that same thing today, Paula? Years later.
Years later, if somebody, having worked in television, for example, I experienced baby, in quotes, reporters who had the look, who had the voice, who were suddenly plucked out of the field and made anchors. And then when the moment comes when breaking news happens, real breaking news, like in New York City breaking news, and they don't know what to do, I would make the same decision today. If I'm not ready, and I know I'm not ready, and I know you're only using me what happens when you, editor, are no longer sitting in that seat and I'm still there and all those people resent me because you decided to force me down their throats?
So I guess the question I have for you though is, despite all the experiences that everybody on this panel have had, despite the work we put in, because as Krissah said, we have always felt that we had to be the best at the table, right? Because it was different for us, because if we failed, we felt like they were going to say, oh, everyone who looks like you might fail. And I don't know, I took that chance at one time. So we were above and beyond overly qualified in many cases. So I say, I'm asking that, I'm saying this to you, that I always feel that way, but I also feel like I'm walking through a door for someone else. And that's the path that I have walked. Unfortunately, I felt that I've had to do that, but if I don't do it, who else will? And what's happening too is, and we talked about this, I think Krissah talked about, and you know, John and Anzio, it's about being, others have been mediocre. Some of us have been mediocre, let's face it. But it carries more, like it's a long-term thing when one of us is, as opposed to someone else. And so I think every opportunity we're presented with to walk through the door for someone else, whether we know the real reason we're there or not, should matter, because we're in it for the real helping our community. Like we all do this. I think everybody on this call probably does what we do, because not just for the journalism, but because of the impact it has on our community.
Well, I want to be clear that, again, this was in the days when there were like 2 or 3 Black people in the newsroom.
But you know, there's still a lot of newsrooms like that.
Yeah.
There absolutely are, but what there also are thousands of Black journalists. Back
Absolutely.
then, there were not thousands.
Right.
I hear you.
So when at the Dallas Times-Herald, this editor who had come from the Washington Post to be the editor of the Dallas Times-Herald, and I had come over from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, I gave him the resumes of people from the Wall Street Journal, from the Washington Post, Miami Herald. He eventually, as I said, hired one of those folks. But those people had been experienced in that specialty. So to just bring me in to a page 1 budget meeting, I'm not representing any section of the paper. Let's just get a Black voice in there. And what I wanted him to understand is the fungibility. You know, like I had a white general manager in New York say to me one day how much he hated Al Roker, who was our weather guy. And he only hated Al Roker because he didn't like Al Roker as a person. And I don't know who doesn't like, and there was a guy across town who was a Black weather man across town. And this white man said, I can get rid of Al Roker and I'll just hire that guy and nobody will know the difference. And I said, and I asked him, I said, is that what you think this is all about? That we're all just fungible? That we're interchangeable parts? Eventually, he got promoted, this guy, to running, by the way, CNBC after Roger Ailes. So I fantasize sometimes about writing a book about my experiences, which would all be about diversity and racism in the field of journalism, in newspapers and television. But I used to say I have to wait for a lot of people to die first, but they're dying. So maybe I'll go ahead and write it.
But I tell you, Katrice, I appreciate and thankful for, you know, what you just said there, because, you know, really what you said is that you cherish the responsibility, you know, that responsibility. Sometimes we get in these roles and we get these titles and, you know, and people think it's about the power. And I would say there's a lot of responsibility here to make sure that we are representing us, whether we think, you know, that's no longer the case, that, you know, and, you know, we've all heard that the line, you got to work 2 and 3 times harder than everybody else just to get, you know, I wish that, you know, my grandmother would have taught me to work 2 or 3 times smarter versus the harder. But either way, you know, it's still, you know, it still holds true today that we do have to be better. And sometimes, You may get the call because of the color of your skin. You may get the job because of the color of your skin. I know that has happened to me. I know for a fact that has happened. Now, and I can tell you, I was not good at those jobs in the beginning. When I got there, I had to earn my keep. And so for those who are joining us today, I think it is, listen, if somebody's calling you and calling you to a room or whatever, because of the color of your skin, I would say, answer that call. I think I saw it somewhere in the chat that someone is tired, being the only Black person. They're tired of carrying the weight. They're tired of, getting all the questions, right now. John Lewis could say he was tired. He kept walking across the bridge. What we do, we going into offices. And so I think, now's not the time to really get tired, because we do have people that don't look like us are trying to come to the table. They want to understand, they want to know. And I think as long as we have some attention here, the people that want to help us, people that want to, meet in the middle of the road, we have to take advantage of that when it happens. Yes, you can be tired. I'm saying be tired, but I'll also say take the conversation, get the communication going, get the talking going, because if we, at the end of the day, if we're still left in our corners, it's what I call if we still at the middle school cafeteria, and everybody remember what happened in the middle school cafeteria. The Black people sat at one table. The football team sat at a table, the band, you had the, Asian Americans sat at a table. And I think that we do need to, to kind of be together talking in order to get past this. And I think we need allies. I think not only we need allies, I believe we need to be better allies as well too, to other races.
To piggyback off of what Anzio just said, I think it is a wasted opportunity to just have a room full of white people with none of us in there. And if I can lend my voice for whatever reason, even if it is for a sense of window dressing, I'm going to make sure I'm the best window dressing there. I know that I think about my grandparents or my ancestors every time I feel, emotionally exhausted or just exasperated with fielding ridiculous questions in 2022. I remember that a generation before or 2 generations before, we wouldn't have been able to be in those rooms, period. And I tell our young reporters that coming in, especially our young reporters of color, I tell them that because they'll come to me and they'll say, oh, such and such a person said this, that, and the other. I tell them that we have a responsibility as a
Yes, could you mute yourself, please?
Yep, that we have a responsibility as a people to make sure that our voices are heard and to take advantage of being able to express an opinion or to stop certain problematic coverage. You might not have been the head of a section, but I don't think that would stop you from saying, if someone were to, I don't know, just want to take a truly stereotypic approach to a story, I don't think that, you not running a section or having a section precludes you from, making an objection there. I think that the true mistake comes in if you come into that room and then you are too intimidated to say anything and you are just sitting there for the sake of sitting there. I think you have to be an advocate, and I think you have to make sure that your voice is heard. So I think that is the most important thing, because who knows how long they would have taken to finally hire someone. That means that might have been weeks or months of just having absolutely nobody in that room. So for me, if someone is going to say, come into the room and we want to have your perspective there, I'm going to give my perspective until they tell me to shut up.
So to be clear,
yeah,
I have never not spoken up, as I'm sure you probably know.
Yes.
This was a one-off that he was going to test and see what it would be like to have a Black voice in the room. Now, in those days, and I don't know about these days, I think it's still true, but in those days for NABJ, there were enough of us so that we were always putting each other up for jobs that were suited, right? So to have taken me at that point in my career, who had worked at the Syracuse Herald Journal, the Fort Worth Star Telegram for 2 years, and I'd been in this location for maybe 9 months. Couldn't have been more than 9 months because I only worked at the Times Herald for a year. To stick me in that room with those folks because he had a notion that he wanted to shake stuff up, that wasn't going to work. We also had a relationship with NABJ. So this wasn't a circumstance where it would have taken months. He just saw me, had a relationship with me, and come into this meeting. And what I wanted him to not do was that. Let's institutionalize this. If what you are looking for are Black editors who are page one editors, we really can find them. You don't have to leap me over other people. Because if that was the case, what happened to the city editor? What happened to the Metro editor? You can't take the night assistant city editor and stick her in the page one budget meeting. It would have been a mistake in so many ways. And certainly for me, it would have been one where I knew it didn't matter that it was me, it was just having a Black person sitting there. And that I resented.
So Paula, one of the things I, would love to hear other panelists, address is the sense of urgency by us, at our organizations to make change, to do things like, I think we talked about this in the prep meeting where, folks like, hey, are you done yet? Or, hey, when do we go see some change? Like they're waiting on this big revolutionary thing to come from you and come from your office.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's talk about that. And then let's also talk about who sets the timetable. I mean, when you are put in a role of being the DEI leader, do you get to set the timetable for the enterprise? You can influence it, but in my experience, for me, I insisted upon reporting to the CEO and no one else, because I knew in the early days, now remember, I was the first one, and it was in the era, this was in 2007. So I was the first one in our company to have that role. And there were people who were frightened then, as I'm sure there are people who are frightened now. So the question is, who sets the timetable and how influential can you be as the DEI leader? Somebody else, and there's a question in here, and we should start taking questions soon. There's a question in here asking to please address for the folks who are dealing with DEI, the whole concept of burnout.
I'll answer Anzio's question and then also happy to weigh in on Juliet's. I mean, I think about this quite a bit. The post is 143 years old. And so in thinking about the history of some of these institutions and the work that's ahead of us, I've always believed that this is a long game, that there are no quick fixes, but it does feel like we've been in a moment and an opportunity to make some structural change that I hope will continue to help the institution evolve. I sometimes wonder about, some of the upstart and new media organizations, if you get to build it from scratch, right? Can you do it in a way that holds to some of the values that we've been talking about more organically, and you're still building them in America, in this society? And from the folks that I've talked to at some of those news organizations, they have some of the same struggles. So I think it's important for those of us, in these very specific roles to not hold the burden of fixing this all on our own shoulders. I think you're right, Paula. The CEO, the executive editor, the publisher, the folks, who also control the budgets have to be, of the same mind, in order to drive change. There are some things that I think most of our news organizations can do relatively quickly, and there are other things that are just going to take a lot of time, that it's about cultural change. And to Juliet's question, I had a mentor tell me, and I've sort of taken it to heart going into this year, that even with the tough stuff in this work, continuing to find the joy in the job. And for me, the journalism is still the joy. And so getting to seed stories and shape stories and be in on conversations about really cool stories is still so much fun. When we are in the newsroom and we've brought some folks back, being able to walk around and talk to folks about what they're working on, being involved in hiring and creating opportunities for people, and then seeing their work at the top of the homepage, all of that is thrilling. And I think that, making sure that in the crowded calendar and the problem solving and all the issues that bubble up, that there is still time for the joy of journalism and the joy of that work is really important to me.
Patrice, you want to weigh in?
So obviously I've not been in a DEI role per se, but obviously I've seen my position, no matter what it was, as being someone who had to be an advocate for all kinds of diversity. And so, I was thinking about this, not that long ago, probably in the last month, the Dallas Morning News, if you look at the masthead in print, which we don't spend a lot of time with anymore, there are more women than men. And we have 2 people of color, the deputy publisher and myself. And she does, as part of her role, Leona Allen, help oversee our DEI efforts. I think that obviously I wouldn't join an organization as a DEI facilitator, coordinator, leader, if I didn't know the CEO was really serious about making change. So I don't think anybody of color would do that. And I would say for the newsroom, it's nice that I have a lot of autonomy to follow through on practices that I think are best for the newsroom. Maybe that's not what the rest of the company does, but I can set the tone for the newsroom. And that's what I'm most concerned about right now. And so to me, inclusion, having those conversations that are difficult, making sure that people's voices are heard. I think that sometimes though, our people think, well, I thought you heard me, but maybe you didn't agree. They construe the two. So they think you didn't hear me, you didn't listen because I didn't follow through on their suggestions. So making clear, what inclusion means, that you have the freedom, you feel comfortable expressing your viewpoints, but it doesn't mean that your viewpoints are going to be carried out. And that's my goal, helping educate our staff about that. My other goal is, I'll tell you this, I spend just as much time going to events in this community. I've been here 7 months that no editor, frankly, no reporter has even gone to, even of color, than I do for other events that are typical for an editor to go to. Several weekends ago, I did the UNCF Gala, and then the next day I did a gala called the Mocha Gala, it's a local skincare line owned by this wonderful Black business owner, but it was full of Black business owners who were like, we've never seen someone for the DMN here. I spoke at St. Luke's Church another Sunday. So I spend just as much time there because it's important for me to show my staff, I'm not just asking you to do those things, I'm doing those things. And I'm gonna come back and talk to you about it. I'm gonna also talk to you about the fact that you've never been there. So I think that's more important when I think about, having a coordinator is one thing, but carrying out actually what that mission is far more important to me.
Yeah, and I think if you, even if you look at Jason's question there, like how do you monitor the long-term maintenance of DEI changes in the newsroom? And I think that's a good one. It fits right into what we were just saying there. I think everything that we do, you have to find a way to measure it. You have to find a way to measure it. You know, we measure everything else about our industry, looking at it on a daily basis. You know, we're looking at web numbers, how long people spend the time reading articles, sales numbers, you look at everything. I think we have to be in the business of measuring DEI as well too, and putting some type of metrics, goals there so that you can know where you are. If you don't measure it, it's not going to change. I mean, it's not going to change. You got to look at your more than just the numbers of women and people of color, and it's a lot more, especially in the journalism world. You know, we know I can look at any one of our television stations across the country and measure them. We can see how they performed, you know, over the last couple of months. We can look at how they show people of color in their stories. Are they in positions of expertise? Are they in positions of authority? Or are they in positions of criminal activity? And those that are in positions of expertise, did that come from our diverse resource guide? If it didn't come from the diverse resource guide, did we add it to the diverse resource guide? So those are all things that we can go through and measure, and with the idea that whether I'm in this position a year from now or somebody else is in it 5 years from now, that the systems are already set up to hopefully outlast me. If it changes all because, you know, I change out and somebody else comes in, then we haven't put good systems in place.
I've been told that we can go over by about 10 minutes or so. So I'm going to ask a question, and then I'd like to ask the folks who joined us to, let's try some verbal questions. But here is a question. How did you make the transition, the leap? What is it that made you go from being a working journalist, a working reporter, to being an editor, a news director, which I would consider to be I would call them the power positions, the ones leading to authority. Because I think all of us got into this because we wanted to tell the real stories and to what I refer to as write the daily history book. And then at some point, you step away from, you know, being the one telling the story to being the one setting the stage for others to tell the story. So how does that happen? Because I think ultimately that's one of the goals of the entire DEI initiative, is to get more people who look like us into positions where we call the shots.
I can hop in there. I, had a conversation with Kevin Merida, and who many of you will know, and, was thinking about editing, had been a reporter for 15 or 16 years at that point. And it was his description, not just of, I think I had a conception of the task of the job, you're line editing, you're working with reporters, but he talked about the decision-making in the room and the ability to create opportunity for other people and the strategic thinking that comes with it. And, the sort of power of being a voice in those conversations. And that for me was what helped to flip that switch to say, I want to give this a try. And did really find that there is a certain, I did not miss seeing my byline because the ability to help the reporters that I was working with soar and really reach their full potential gave me the same sort of, feeling. And then, just being in a position to really, help to think about the decisions on the team that I was on that we were making and who would get assignments and what kind of coverage and how could we strategize around those things. I just really found both the people management and the larger shaping of coverage to be really exciting.
Patrice, you want to answer that?
Sure. So I actually never thought about being an editor, had no interest. But I remember at one point I was at the Virginian Pilot for the first, 2 decades of my career. And I remember, maybe 10 years or so in, the recruiter and trainer was retiring. And I remember reading the job description thinking, man, those are the things I really love, helping others, training others, recruiting people who look like me, who think like me. Maybe they don't look like me, but they understand the mission to serve all. And I remember just having a preliminary conversation with somebody about it, the top editor and a few other people. And they said to me from that conversation, look, you probably should have been a manager to get this job, but man, we never, you should go into management. And so they convinced me to go into kind of an entry-level management job for 1 year. And I told them I'm going to hate that because that's not what I wanted, but commit to me that in a year I can go back to reporting. But what I found was that I really, really liked being able to help others tell their stories. And it wasn't just my story, but I could tell the stories, help tell the stories of 5 other people, for instance, with my first, editing job. I really liked that. I got more energy and excitement and gratification from others fulfilling their goals than I did for me. So anyway, that's how I got into editing. Never again thought I would be a top editor, never thought I would be where I am today or any other position that I've had. It's been, the grace of God, frankly, and other people seeing that in me. But it's about serving others is how I see it.
Anzio, you want to tackle that one?
Look, to everybody that's here, I got into journalism and wanted to be a news director because Paula told me that I was going to be a news director and nothing else. And but I'm thankful for that. I'm thankful for her giving me that the idea, putting it into my head, being a person I can look at and see. It certainly was a great for me to, they say, if you can see it, you can believe it and you can do it. And so that was great. And I never thought I would do anything else but run newsrooms or run television stations. And so the DEI role was presented to me. And the best part about it was I was like, all right, so what am I going to be doing? And it's like, yeah, you make it up. You tell us what you're going to be doing. And so I probably enjoyed that, the last few years the most. I was doing a radio interview for a Philadelphia radio station, and because I had last run newsrooms in Philadelphia, and they said, so what do you credit? No, it's like, how much do you credit your new role to your MBA? Because I just got my MBA from Temple. And I was like, I don't credit Temple. I give all credit on this to George Floyd, and because I know this would not have happened if that whole movement hadn't started. So I'll tell you that, I do wake up every day with a sense of purpose and, feeling like, somebody died for this, on camera, minutes and minutes and minutes, we had to relive that. And so I do think there was an awakening for America, for the other side of America. Well, we always knew that was happening, but there was this awakening. And so how do we make sure that, we take that awakening and turn it into action? I feel like that's what we've been able to do there. And Paul, if you don't mind, I see Ryan Williams has asked to share an example of DEI strategy or tactics that not only result in editorial success, but effective business strategy. And I just share, our Chicago stations, we have a NBC, a Telemundo, and a sports network there. I've been proud of the work they've done in creating authentic relationships in the Black community in Chicago. So we held a meet the team for Black media and Black businesses in Chicago, and I will say that we had sessions on how to advertise, how to reach us, how to reach your audiences, and we did that out of an idea of just providing some authentic, connections to the community. But that turned into a lot of money, coming into the television stations, to our digital sites, and as I told our other television stations, it's the right thing to do. We did that because it was the right thing to do. Wasn't expecting any money, but it turned into money.
John, I want to ask you, because you're in a unique position in that, you know, as I said earlier, I think a lot of us got into this because of our love for, you know, truth telling and finding those stories wherever they are. And you have continued to do that and still risen to a position of, you know, you're kind of straddling in some ways, because you get to be a reporter, but you also get to be a newsroom leader and a voice for DEI. So how are you managing that? Are you squeezing 48 hours into every day? How do you divide that and make it work so that the other people who are here participating in this might also follow some of the strategies you've come up with?
I think that you have to be extremely organized and have a plan. You can't just throw everything at the wall in hopes that it sticks. I think you need to have like an agenda of what you really want to accomplish. So I made sure that from the very beginning, and this our DEI, and I'm sorry, our diversity committee was formed maybe a year or two before George Floyd happened. So I already knew that our management was serious about this, and it wasn't a reactionary thing for them, that this is something that they set out to do because it was the right thing to do, not because this is what everybody else was doing in the country. This was something that we were doing before. This is why you know, I mentioned the thing with Maynard, because no one else in the country was dealing with them as far as the content audit was concerned. So I wanted to set that up. So I felt that in order to get buy-in from the newsroom, you had to showcase that you would have success and that you knew what you were doing and that this was an organized effort. So I knew that getting buy-in from everyone and having wins, executed initiatives that were professionally done, people got a lot out of it, and there was a result that happened as a result of the initiative. I thought that was important, and as more people saw that we were doing more and then gradually bigger and more important and more impactful projects in the newsroom, I knew at that point that, you know, that momentum would carry on. So there would be a lot of work up front, but the payoff towards the end would be greater. So yeah, I separated things into 3 different silos, you know, things that could be done over, you know, in a week or a couple days, quick hit activities or cultural activities that could, you know, get everyone to buy into DEI or the mindset of diversity, and that it affected everyone, and that it wasn't just a responsibility of the Black people in the room or the brown people in the room, that everyone was a stakeholder. And then the medium type things that would take maybe a few months to accomplish, and then the longer term projects that would take maybe a year or 2, or would be truly systemic, changing things for the newsroom. I think that having that type of approach, an organized approach, not only makes people, you know, realize that you are serious about what you are doing, but you're able to then check things off your list, and you are able to then document where your wins are coming from. So that would be my advice. My advice to people who are not editors, that you can still make change in the newsrooms. Editing is great. It's just not what I want to do at this point in my life. But I still want people to know that their voices can be heard if they make their voices heard.
And so just operationally, just answer this for me. Did you have to pull yourself out of coverage at times in order to, how did you were you alternating? Was it all concurrent? How did this happen?
No, I actually think that I've been more prolific as a reporter during this. I have more 1A stories than I've ever had in life. I think it's actually helped me, because dealing with editors and on a regular basis, talking to them about certain story ideas, they are more comfortable with me, and they realize that I know what I am talking about when it comes to this space. So they're putting more of a value on these types of stories. So, you know, I have a story that's running this week about the injuries that drag queens sustain while performing. And then a couple weeks ago, I did a story about gosh, there are a lot. But no, I mean, it just changes from time to time. But I know that I have editors who, you know, value what I am bringing to the table, and they see a good payoff, as well as realizing that these are stories that have needed to be told forever, and that it's time to get on the right side of history. So
Great. I'm going to look up that story because that sounds fascinating.
I'm going to send it to you too.
Send it to me. I really want to read that one. I've wondered because I've seen those drop, and I'm like, I don't know how they do that and still get up and walk. That's amazing. So, all right, let's, you know, does anybody here in the group have a question that you'd like to ask out loud and not in the chat necessarily?
I have a question, Paula. Hi guys, I'm Christy. So I'm the one that spoke to a couple of you guys, but my area, actually it's great listening to what everybody said, but my area is actually more of not really hard news, but like pop culture news, like more like music, sports, film. And actually I just will be going aboard, joining a young lady who her area is film, and she does in the DMV area, she does film and commercials. So I kind of just joined her team yesterday, and I just want to get some feedback from you guys in the panel about what you guys think and how you guys think that I should basically tackle this diversity thing, because I'm the only African American that will be working with her as well. And like I said, my area is pop culture news. So is there any feedback or advice for anybody in the panel with the avenue that I'm trying to take, I guess?
Patrice,
I guess,
like you
yeah.
unmuted, yeah.
So sure, I was going to let someone else. I would just say, you know, approach your new position the same way you would any other position. You know, bring great story ideas, produce great story ideas. You know, I mean, the reason I'm assuming she's hiring you is because you're talented and because you probably will help them reach a wider audience. So, you know, if you don't, if things are great, you might not have to have a lot of dialogue. I think it will be interesting for you to see if there's more commitment to hire others. I don't know if it's a startup, so they're, you know, still trying to raise more money or have more success to bring others on.
No, she's been doing this for like 30 years in the DMV.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I would just say, you know, do your job well and recommend others when there are openings. And you know, and just again, you know, open that door for someone else.
I appreciate that, Patrice.
And Catrice, I think you hit it right on the head. The best thing that all of you can do for DEI and, you know, certainly for diversity is make sure you're at the top of your game. There's nothing beats that whatsoever, is that you're in the top of your game, so that when you're in the top of your game, I always say you can put a brick in the door. That means you can leave the door cracked for somebody else that looks like you to come in. I always say, you know, we're good at leaving the back door open to slip into clubs or, you know, slide into somewhere where, you know, where we try to sneak in. Let's do our part once we get in there.
Great. Anybody else have a question for the panel?
Hey, Paula.
Hey, Ryan.
Hey, thank you all for doing this. I now sit on the board of WABJ after I left NBC. I'm still so much committed to DEI that I wanted to make sure that a local chapter, especially here in Washington, D.C., with so much that was going on among its members, both local and national, still had a strong support. And we want to support within the DMV. So with John and Krissah, let us know, as you all know, let us know what we can do. And so in the Chicago example, Hearing that Chicago example in terms of it being a great successful model is helpful for us when we approach general managers, when we go in and sit down with stations or newspapers and the like, and ensure in terms of how we can be a great partner. With all of your experience with the NABJ from the chapter level and national, what can we as a chapter do to be better advocates and better in terms of strategy to ensure that when we speak to GMs and news directors?
I say that it was something that was done, years ago, but at the national level, NABJ, where, everybody was taking strong looks at who was behind the scenes in newsrooms, and I still think that is a value that can be done, so that you have talking points, you have conversations. I think the relationships that especially WABJ can do is have a relationship with the media in Washington. It's what I call the R before the I. When there is a relationship, it's easier to tackle the issue there. So I certainly would encourage that. This is by the time you have to go to someone, I'm not sure what the conversations look like with NABJ National and CNN, or NABJ and CBS after the CBS stuff. But, I'm sure, I'm hoping and praying that there was already relationships there. And I think that a local chapter can certainly start with the relationships with everybody, establishing those relationships, seeing what that general manager, what their goals are, what they're looking for, how you can assist and help them. And I think that then it helps from there. They very well may say, hey, we need better contacts in the community, or we need this. Or I think you have to start off by seeing what their need is, and through that relationship.
I would also add, and I know this is not going to be a popular response, that NABJ needs to do a better job of advocating and touting print. I think that the past couple of years, there have been major, and I mean major, accomplishments in the print industry. Catrice is one person. The editor of the Houston Chronicle is another. Krissah was another. And I feel that they were very, very, very slow to give them their roses and to talk to the industry and say these things were going on. I see them not having that problem when things happen on the broadcast side. But I know that for print, there have been monumental changes that have been going on for years that I just don't see the same love given to, or the value placed upon, that we see as far as television.
Okay, I certainly can't disagree. I don't know structurally how NABJ processes it these days, but when I was on the board years ago, the vice president for print used to make sure that all of that information was corralled and shared. As the vice president for, back then it was vice president for TV. Now it's got to be more than just TV. But I think you're right. Although I don't know the timing wise the way you do, John. I know that I learned about the promotions of these folks through the NABJ Facebook page, but I don't know whether they were early or late or how that worked. But somewhere in here, I was invited by Washington ABJ, so I don't necessarily. I'll mention that to Dorothy Tucker. Because I think she should be aware of that. Yeah. Well, I'm going to thank the panelists. We lost Catrice. You saw in the chat that she was having the first time gathering of her folks since the pandemic started, so she needed to go, and we went over. But thank you all very much. It was a pleasure to have the conversation, and I hope that you all we're able to see the email addresses of the panelists as they entered them into the chat, so that if you want to, you can follow up with them individually. And Annalisa, you're back to wrap us up.
Well, thank you guys so much for this conversation, Paula. It was an honor to have you as a moderator. You're great. And obviously this conversation is super tough to get in an hour. So many of our newsrooms are facing challenges, especially as, you know, this great resignation is happening. So lots to cover. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it. This will be available at some point on our website. Really appreciate you guys just taking the time to be here and listen in. If you have any further questions, you can forward them to us and we will try to get them answered for you. So thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.